What's good, guys? Dov here. I worked really hard on this video. It's really dense. I'm not gonna lie. I highly recommend that as you're watching it, if something kind of like goes over your head, that you pause the video. I kind of designed it with that in mind. Future videos are not going to be quite like this. We're going to spend a lot more time on the level itself. But as the first video, I wanted to try really hard to make this the introduction to speedrunning, you know? So there's a lot of like core concepts that I think even some of the experienced people who have already run training are going to appreciate. And final reminder that we're ending the giveaway for the FDNY copy I've had in the background this whole time in 3 days. All right, best of luck. Training is FDNY's only fully linear mission. Because the complex, dynamic routing typical of FDNY's other missions is absent here, training is an accessible and surprisingly popular IL. In the context of this 8-part Rescue Percent tutorial series, training will serve as our opportunity to explore FDNY's fundamental movement mechanics that serve as the building blocks for the rest of the game. Let's get started. In the Options tab, you can change the mouse sensitivity. I comfortably play on the lowest sensitivity at 800 DPI, using only my wrist to turn the character. You can modify all other settings, but do not change the resolution of the game. DG Voodoo is programmed to replace the lowest resolution setting slot, in this case 640 by 480. If you'd like to experiment with graphical settings, open the DG Voodoo exe file found in your current patch's root folder. Pertinent options can be found in the General and DirectX tabs. Finally, for reasons that will be discussed in part 2 of this series, I recommend that you play training on the hard difficulty. After a short acceleration period, W, A, S, and D move the player at a constant top speed in all directions, even when combining complementary strafe keys like W and D. However, this does not mean that strafing isn't a vital skill. Many players, myself included, use strafing to change the view angle and gauge distances between themselves and objects, because the player's collision box is quite wide. Also, as seen here, applying movement vector into surfaces like walls slows the player down, losing precious time that can't be made up. The goal of FDNY's simple but solid ground movement system should be obvious now. Cut corners to take fewer steps, but avoid bumping into objects or dragging walls. Right mouse button is jump. Jumping in FDNY is floaty and surprisingly long, with a slow upward trajectory before falling. FDNY has a relevant amount of drift control that can be used in combination with or against the inertia of the jump trajectory. Finally, jump can be held to buffer or continuously input. Both have relevant applications that can be seen on the input overlay throughout this tutorial. All levels have several actionable frames before the view model is fully loaded on screen. Make sure to buffer your W input to save additional time. As we watch the beginning phase of the recorded training run, pay attention to the input overlay, but understand that other movement methods like full W steering are also viable. This first series of jumps we call first barrier jump. We're going to spend some time dissecting this problem as it's one of the trickiest jump sequences in the game and has a lot of intricacies that teach good fundamentals. Firstly, we need to take the turn wide enough to allow us to space our jump while maintaining full acceleration. This is what can happen if you take the turn too tightly. Here are some examples that represent the spectrum of movement available to the player. Slow down or pause the video as needed to get a full picture of what's going on. After we've successfully mantled the first barrier, we'll need to leave as late as possible or we'll fall short of the middle barrier. This means that sometimes buffering an input will move your spacing too far forward to make the jump. We'd like to fully clear the final barrier because landing on it puts us into tumble and causes us to move further in the direction of our jump's inertia. This works against our ideal situation, which is to use our drift control to steal as much space on the left as possible. Now, let's talk about left control, C, and right control put the player into a crouch state instantly. Crouch state is only accessible via toggle, which means that holding the key does nothing. The player cannot enter a crouch state while in the air. You can, however, retain your crouch state by walking off of an edge while crouched. Jumping from a crouch state is the same as from a standing position, and the player's collision will reset as soon as they leave the ground. Finally, the game behaves differently if there is collision above the player, preventing them from uncrouching. Hitting crouch and jump while there is collision above you both return, but a jump input will freeze the player for as long as the key is held, whereas a crouch input does not affect speed. Okay, let's apply what we learned from the first barrier jump and these crouching mechanics to what we call the second barrier jump. Obviously, we crouch as late as possible, but the real tricky part is the uncrouch timing. We need to be as fast as possible so we can reach max acceleration in this small space and land on top of the middle barrier without hitting our feet, but we can't use jump because we'd get frozen under collision. If you don't like the idea of one precise crouch input, you can use a combination of left control and C to overlay multiple inputs in a short time span as shown here. The whole sequence might look something like this, making sure to walk off the last barrier instead of jumping. This is the first door, which opens the direction we intend to go. It's important to keep in mind that we'll need to memorize which doors require a wider line. Your homework for today is to experiment with the 3 jumps in the beam room. Remember that our goal whenever playing FDNY is to take as few steps as possible. The gap room is the last major parkour-styled obstacle in training. This challenge is particularly fascinating because unlike the rest of training, there is a rich spectrum of strategies available to the player. In this tutorial, we're only going to cover what we consider the optimal strategy, but you should consider others. This first gap is secretly one of the hardest jumps in the level. On one hand, we'd like to waste as little time as possible swinging wide to set up our jump. On the other hand, taking the corner too tightly runs us into the wall on the right, and our drift control is not strong enough to jump facing fully forward. Here are some successful attempts utilizing different techniques. Let's move on to the second gap. It's tempting to want to go for the jump outright, but the consensus opinion is that using the extra height that the chair affords you allows you to clear the gap at an angle. Of course, it is possible to use the closer chair, but your spacing is awkward if you make the first gap jump optimally. Finally, the chair is visually misleading. Its actual collision is more than large enough for us to build the full acceleration needed to clear the gap. In training's penultimate challenge, we finally get to experience the namesake of the game. The fire shield at the bottom of the screen is FDNY's only form of relevant health, as the player does not take fall damage. When the fire shield is fully used up, an unskippable animation plays, and the player is spawned at a point which we'll discuss in a later episode. Note that you take different amounts of damage based on your proximity to the fire and also the size of the fire itself. Additionally, we can take less damage by jumping over fire. We grab the fire extinguisher off the wall automatically by walking near it, and your ammunition is refilled via the same method. By holding down the left mouse button while aiming at a fire, we can suppress them, causing them to become dramatically less intense and allowing us to walk over them. Note that almost any fire, if suppressed long enough, can become trivial to walk over, but unlike the hose, the extinguisher can only suppress fires and they'll regain their size and intensity after we stop. Fire management in the context of training is rather trivial, but we'll discuss the topic at more length at a later point. As we enter the final room, a proximity trigger will immediately apply the goggles to us, although typically you spawn with them at the beginning of a level. White signals indicate survivors, the sole objective of the game, and blue spots indicate flames. The signals fade over time and do not have infinite range, but there is no cooldown for pinging, which we can do with the left mouse button. Now that we have all three pieces of our equipment, note that you can cycle through them using the corresponding 1, 2, and 3 keys on your keyboard. So how do we actually beat the game? Every FDNY rescue mission falls more or less into the same gameplay flowchart. First, the player starts the level at the same point every time. Next, the player picks up survivors one at a time and carries them to rescue triggers, of which there can be more than one. There may be auxiliary objectives, such as unlock the vault or open the deck, but these objectives are not strictly necessary to complete the level. After all the survivors have been rescued, the mission can then be ended via an exit trigger. Note that some rescue triggers are also exit triggers. However, it's a case-by-case basis. Some exit triggers are separate. Don't worry, this information will be covered in detail in subsequent tutorials. Some of you can probably tell what sets training apart now. First we do the movement, then we enter the room where the rescue loop is done. In the following missions, these concepts are going to come bundled together. One last mechanical deep dive. Survivors that spawn in the same place every time we call static survivors. Other survivors spawn dynamically, like these mutually exclusive spawns on bank robbery. Training has 2 of the more uncommon 1 in 3 spawns, but in practice, they're easy to remember. The first survivor spawns in one of the first 3 doors. The second survivor spawns in one of the last 3 doors. Survivors are picked up instantly when any part of our collision box touches theirs, so you should practice turning around based on spacing, not on reaction to the survivor icon appearing. The most popular method of achieving this is using the mouse to 180 while W steering. Theoretically, you lose a few frames switching from W to S because the character needs to re-accelerate, but this isn't notable enough to deny you doing what makes you more comfortable. As was implied earlier in the video, we can only carry 1 survivor at a time, and they can only be dropped if a rescue trigger is touched or if the player passes out. In the next episode, we'll talk about FDNY's single most important piece of tech, the crouch button.